Welcome back to the Mars on Life podcast. I'm your host, Sebastian Shug. With me as always.
Over here is Ryan Mancini.
Do you guys like second and third takes? Because I'm starting to not like them after our most recent technical difficulties. Man, and did we have a good discussion?
We did, yeah. No, this is something to get used to with podcasts.
No, and I totally get that. It's just the fact that, you just spend so much time and effort in something only to have it go down the drain. I don't even know what impression I was going with there. Anyway, welcome back to Mars on Life, where subjectivity is out there and we have topics abound. If you want to go right back into our discussion about American Dirt from last week's episode,
yes,
we can definitely do that. We do have a lot on the table. However, I think we should just kind of streamline our way in there. Streamline?
Full steam ahead?
Full steam ahead, yeah.
Yeah, the story about American Dirt, it's the story that won't die. And in a weird way, I really hope, I'm not a praying man, so I'm not going to say I pray, but I really do hope that it's started a discussion in terms of authors and if they have a piece of work that when it becomes published, there's something thorough and there's something about it that it doesn't feel like it's appealing to a certain demographic that's focused on fetishizing a very serious issue, right, like what is happening at the southern border.
There definitely is both an artistic and political disconnect between how you say the subjectivity of sort of authors, writers of regarding what they want to write about, what their main intent is, as well as how it is being produced and sold to the public, as well as what audience intentions are. How are they supposed to perceive it? Well, you could have a very one-of-one brick-and-mortar relationship of this is what I'm producing, this is what you should be receiving. That's in a perfect world, and we don't live in one of those. So, when you talk about author Jeanine Cummings' American Dirt, you talk about a woman who put out a dramatized, theatrical, as the New York Times calls it, border chic trauma porn rendition of essentially your standard crossing the border story. Mm-hmm. Now, I really don't know how to describe it other than it was an intentional process of giving empathy with fellow human beings who are struggling to find safety in an otherwise unsafe world. Now, if it creates that message, then we're solid. You can theoretically end the discussion right there. However, that's not all it proposes. So yeah. I know you had some strong opinions on it, and we'll definitely go into that.
I mean, the issue, too, with the book is that a lot of people who were very vocal about it, they were people that I follow on social media who live in and around Los Angeles and Southern California. And so their reaction to the book was outrage, shock, but also a little bit of curiosity just because there are so many things in the book that when you are someone who's finally written a book and when you've written on books or when you've written about books that written about subjects into books that focus on what is happening at the southern border, when you get to paint the faces of those who, if you're a reporter, you're sharing the stories of people that their stories would have been shared probably in some other capacity, but you're sharing it out of a sense of urgency, and this is something that needs to be told now because of the circumstances we're in with, xenophobia, with a xenophobic president. And it just felt like to me that so much of the backlash, it was appropriate, and it was so much of the kind of criticism that a book like this needed, just because even down to the book cover itself, with that design element, that's something that every other book I've read, whether it's been a novel or journalism about immigration over the last few decades, none of it has treated the subject in such a way where it's like we want to make this like kind of a crime novel, but also it's giving it the same kind of vibe that some people sometimes slap this onto the country of Brazil, where it's that kind of like dangerous but sexy. And it's like, no, you're trivializing people's lives. You're trivializing what people go through, and you're turning it into something for profit. And yes, this may be a story that you feel like needs to be told, but at the same time, you were picked out, you were chosen out of several people that are already doing this, and they're doing it in a far more dignified way. And that, of course, ties in with the hashtag, and I'm making sure I get it right just because I don't want to flip it. Dignidad Literaria. 3 years of Spanish, I tried. But at the same time, like that's, like in all seriousness, that's the whole point of having these books talk about this subject without it feeling like.
So you feel that American Dirt contributes to, and I'm using Marcelo Castillo's words, in paraphrase. You feel that American Dirt is contributing to the bastardization of other novels who touch on this subject in a much more dignified manner. So you feel that, essentially, and Cummins is a mixed race white Latina woman, right? So is this book told in the perspective of someone who is mixed, or someone who is of the intent of, no, I actually intended it to be dramatized and theatrical? It does contribute to the bastardization. It shouldn't be a part of the pack of books that is supposed to represent the pressure valve that is the United States-Mexican border.
Well, it's...
I mean, you're saying it definitely doesn't help the discourse.
It doesn't. Well, it's a misrepresentation, I guess, of... and this was what I was saying until the difficulties were...
Johnny Five decided to...
Technicking.
Yeah.
It's... Yeah, words. I just made them up. It definitely adds on to a stereotype within the publishing industry and also just with literature that when you already have so many other voices elevating the conversation, but also pinpointing it with not just accuracy, but also seriousness and a very strong level of dedication and love, but also anger and disappointment, but also the objectivity of some of these people are journalists. It's painting a picture without misrepresenting the people that are hurt by it.
But would you say that this is a misrepresentation of, elements that are truthful in nature? I mean, the fact of the matter is that the dramatized elements, as dramatized as they are true.
Well,
I mean, they're not true to the extent of, in the way the novel's written, but in terms of, situational hazards and...
some of the information I know, that there's...
it's definitely not easy
there was an
crossing
interview
that desert.
Luis Alberto Rea did an interview, and he's reported and he's written his own novels, but he noticed a lot of comparisons with what he saw from his own reporting, but it was translated basically into American Dirt, and it was just weird and uncomfortable. And he's also somebody who within the publishing industry has faced that kind of bigotry of, your book's not going to sell with a non-Anglo last name. And I think that's something that at the heart of all this is problematic. And I know something that the publisher, Macmillan, has been trying to do, or at least that's something that it is announced, is that after meeting with other writers and people holding a forum in discussion with the publishers, they said that they released a statement. This is according to the LA Times. They released a statement detailing the unprecedented commitments Macmillan made after the 2-hour meeting, to boil down to what the headline basically says, which is publisher vows to increase Latinx staff, published authors, which is phenomenal, and I'm happy about that. But the fact that it took the outrage,
they're doing it out of response. Then they're not doing it out of sheer will, goodwill of their heart of we're doing this because we need to, not we're doing this because it sparked an outrage and now we need to. Right.
Well, that's the thing. It's the opposite.
Oh, okay.
They're doing this. or at least, and I'm not going to speculate on what I rescind
because
that.
it is
I'm
a
not-
predominantly white publishing industry. That's Macmillan.
Well, if anything, it's kind of like this should have already been happening, and yet it took the outrage of a book where its authenticity
Was put into question,
reflecting people who are referred to as the nameless brown faces, like, or the faceless, like that's something. Miriam Gerba, the author who wrote the first really scathing review, and just want to say we stand in solidarity with her. I'll touch on what's been going on with her in just a moment, but she noted while she was with her family in Mexico, she was reading it and was like, well, we have faces, we're people. And I think that's something that the publisher and at the same time the author, Janine Cummings, to some extent, there needed to be a better understanding as to the fact that everybody is going to read this. This isn't
of course,
for the crime novelists that read crime novels at the airport. This is going to be, when you market a book like this and you're touching on one of the most sensitive topics of our whole of our whole being of existence at this very moment.
right?
You're carrying on that burden of the pain and agony that people are going through as we speak, which in a weird way that kind of ties in with our second topic that we'll get into.
And just one more point before we segue. I do think though that
we're still on this.
No, oh yeah, I know, but I do think though that the ironic subtext of it, of not giving people names or faces, really calls to the attention that they do need names and faces, and that they do need to be represented in a dignified way. There is, I really can't put into words the staggering amounts of individuals not identified, put in cages, not brought into the United States. And I think it really kind of goes to show how ignorant American attitudes are towards it.
Yeah.
Where we choose to be blissfully ignorant because we're not on that side of the border. And as much as it may appear in one context, well, that just isn't dignified because there isn't a distinct X and Y to it, the fact that it doesn't have a distinct X and Y, that's why you dig deeper into it. And I mean, personally, in my perspective, well, in my opinion, that stood out to me the most. That's something that we should be looking further into.
Right.
So.
Well, and I think too, because I mentioned it last week about the outrage towards the book, and I know that the publishers canceled part of their tour for the book, and it's kind of like in the time since, now granted, something else we were talking about in the previous discussion, not the one you heard last time, but we had talked about the book's elevation. And before I get into the contrast of that, of its basically the rebuke of the book, the book was so elevated from the get-go with Oprah's book club, which
sold it.
Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, The Water Dancer, it arguably didn't need that elevation, given that he's, and granted this is also my opinion too, he's one of the best American authors alive today. He's already a well-known figure. He's a part of the national discourse. But at the same time, that being part of the book club probably pushed him quite a bit, pushed the book quite a bit. And, the book, it's a beautiful book. It deserves it. That being said, it's such a reversal once you hit American Dirt, where you're kind of wondering where the evaluation process was in terms of how did this get here, and then some of the celebrity endorsements of people that didn't know how people were immediately reacting to it, and then they rescinded their endorsements. And I know Salma Hayek, I know also the star of Roma, Yalitza Aparicio, she had endorsed it. Gina Rodriguez had endorsed it. So it, adding, and I think that's the thing, is it's to the point that you brought up about like adding onto the discourse. It's just that there's those of us that, especially in those, and I say those of us meaning those of us in the journalism industry, where we nitpick further, and we find those faults. I've personally had to deal with this very recently with a local congressional candidate, and faced very bad backlash from it. But at the same time, it's holding that honesty, especially honesty where you're realizing in the back of your head this still affects you somewhat personally, which Miriam Gerba made it she's made her views abundantly clear. I'm all in favor of everything that she's said about the book, just based off of everything that I have read and heard and seen. And, full disclosure, neither of us have read the book. That being said, as I said last time, I recommend other books as well from other authors. I mentioned Valeria Luiselli. But the thing that now has me more, I guess, frustrated with this whole subject is what happened with Miriam Gerba, where, she was the person who kind of sparked a lot of the backlash, rightfully so. But then she was removed from Long Beach Polytechnic High School, and basically she was placed on administrative leave and then escorted from the school. This was last week.
Right.
And, I follow her on Twitter. The Mars on Life Twitter follows her as well.
Mm-hmm.
But, she is brilliant. She is an amazing person, and she's delved very deep into her personal life. She's delved very deep into criticizing American Dirt. But just because of that, I don't think it's necessary for her to have been removed from her school, especially also due in part because, she
definitely had a lot of, she had a huge following that surged when it came to, her fellow students.
Oh, her students love her, and
putting up "We Believe You," "I'm with her."
Oh, I wish I had her.
We won't be silenced any longer.
Yeah.
And
I know that she's also, and this is according to the LA Times, that she's turned her attention to brewing allegations of abuse or battery on the part of another Long Beach Poly teacher. She's also raised unconfirmed allegations against a separate teacher at another school. Now, again, it makes me wonder whether or not the American Dirt, quote-unquote, controversy was just the icing on the cake when it came to the school looking at her and thinking, oh, well, of course. At the same time, it's irrelevant. It's unrelated to her work as a teacher. And
right.
It's, this is her addressing a serious issue that needs to be addressed. And if there's other serious issues at hand, they deserve to be addressed. Mm-hmm. And I think that's again, why I say we stand in solidarity with her. All the power to her. She's an amazing author herself. Her book, Mean, is fascinating. It's something worth checking out. And, it's just, I don't know, the whole American Dirt thing. We talked about it last time, is the issue with books in general, about the oversaturation. How many times can a topic be touched upon without it feeling like repetitive, or without it feeling like there's no solution?
That's kind of the way that American Dirt played out, where it wasn't repetitive, where it was repetitive in the sense of subtext of what it was trying to accomplish. Of here's the representation of what actually goes on in terms of application and attitude of people crossing the border, or at least the attempt at it.
Right.
The fact that it was written in such a manner, sparking this level of attention, it definitely stood out. You can argue my head off for days about how it did bastardize X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. Caught our attention.
Yeah. Well, and plus we care about books.
Yeah. Granted.
And I feel too that, because years ago I felt that way, and this was this was when Barack Obama was still president and immigration wasn't, it was an issue, it was a topic, but it wasn't something
it wasn't a fire under our ass.
It wasn't. Well, it definitely was.
Oh.
It was just that
It wasn't turned on high.
The xenophobia wasn't dialed so high
Right.
when it comes to our national politics. I mean, it was there. It just wasn't dialed to the point where the chief executive said horrible and cruel and disgusting things the way the current chief executive has. But, I remember reading books at CSUN about addressing, the dreamers and thinking to myself, like, this book is amazing, but at the same time, how many times do these books need to be written until something changes or something happens? And
do you ever feel that because, and this is just kind of a personal question, speaking from one major who is not a journalist,
right,
a journalism major to one who is, do you believe that this repetitive nature of this topic of books is going to ever be effective?
I certainly.
I mean, it's definitely not.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say that because I don't know exactly what power that these books hold.
Well,
now, is it going to spark legislative change?
There's a chance.
There is a chance.
You know what? I'm a realist. I'm a cynic. But
and I definitely want to think in that realistic, manner of.
But at the same time, I'm hopeful. I've tried to treat myself to be in a more hopeful manner about things without completely overindulging in hopefulness. Otherwise,
Right.
I get my expectations really.
I always
crash
keep,
and
I always
burn.
keep my expectations low.
Oh, me too.
Which is why I can look at a book like American Dirt and think, well, that's a very interesting manner that you tackled this issue in. It may have not been effective contextually, but audience interaction was definitely there's definitely dialogue happening here.
Yeah.
Which is what I think can't be said for a lot of books who attempt to regurgitate the same exact issue. Not saying that those issues aren't important.
Right. Well, I
However,
think, I mentioned last time about, books that, all the exposés and all the books that come out about Donald Trump. Those do get repetitive because at the end
they
of the
get
day,
repetitive because it's the same.
It's the same story and it's the
you
same
could
behavior.
You could be apolitical to the max. There's
Yeah.
Republicans that don't even like Donald Trump writing diatribes about why they don't like Donald Trump. And to tell you the truth, I'm starting to not be able to differentiate them effectively.
Well,
Because I can't tell Bill Maher from Rush from
yeah. Well,
I don't know.
Well, that's the thing. Like and I
Ted
mentioned,
Nugent.
I mentioned last week about even political books in general, and I think when it comes down to books on immigration, I've changed my view from years ago where I thought things just need to change. Well, that's the problem. Things changed, but for the worse. And so I now look at these books, books written by some amazing people like Oscar Martinez, Valeria Luiselli, Eileen Truax. These are books that they not only add to the discourse, but they also basically, in the face of such inhumanity from some people in the United States, these are the kinds of stories that absolutely have to be told. Because if people who are so ignorant just flat out refuse to hear any of those stories, then if they just hear a generalized story, they're going to completely dismiss it. If you're able to sit those people down and have them read any of these kinds of writings, whether it's a novel or journalism, preferably journalism, but even if it winds up being a novel, at least they get an idea and at least they're realizing that it's not just some blanket stereotype that, a bleeding heart has given them. They're reading about something that's been documented by somebody who was a first-person witness.
Right.
And I feel like that's something that is so overlooked. And something that, granted, reporting on other issues like, dark money in politics or the Trump White House or climate change. There's a lot of those topics where they keep getting repeated and the same facts keep coming out.
How many times can you keep reading it?
But it's the tenacity of one topic that needs to stand up for those people that are being so negatively affected. And it's a disservice to say that those are people that are faceless. There are so many amazing Latinx writers
Exactly.
that, you know,
and
I could keep going with the ones that I've read from him.
Well, it's like I said previously, it's the facelessness that really stands out to you as saying, you know, why isn't that person getting more notoriety?
Right.
Why isn't that person getting more of an audience? And I definitely read something that someone put a lot of time and effort into writing, which is excellent, over like you said, the 1 million plus, Donald Trump diatribes,
right?
Regurgitation.
Well, and even the ones. Here's the thing: there's even the ones that have great reporting to them. That
it's a new perspective that I never thought I could read, but it
winds up being a slight, like, if you read Bob Woodward's book Fear, and then you read a warning by the anonymous, or as Trump said, anonymous, White House official, like he really did. He was like anonymous, and he did this like Vito Corleone like underbite at the end of saying it was weird. You read those two books, and a warning is a spiritual successor. It's there's a little more history in it, but it's basically a spiritual sequel to Fear. And other than that, there's not really anything else I would highly recommend on this president, just because A, it's still happening, and B, we don't know how it ends. So C, just keep watching what's happening. Don't go out and pick up a copy of something for the fun of it. Mm. That being said, I look at something like Fear, and it's like, yeah, if my kids wanted to know what this time period is like, I would point that out, because that's a snippet. That's a fraction, a snapshot of the hellscape we're in. Whereas a whole biography would be so truncated. I read the presidential biography on Barack Obama by Peter Baker, and it's objective, and it reads like a historical biography, but it feels truncated. Because even though it is very objective, it still feels like there was I still feel like there was information left out to some degree. But anyway, we're getting off topic from American Dirt. Either way, we're going to keep following this and see where it goes, and
we'll show you where the rabbit hole goes.
We're following you, Miriam. We wish the best, and we're standing by you. So, on to our next topic, which is basically arguably kind of the same topic, except now it's a TV show.
Oh, you've been itching to talk about this.
With my boy Al Pacino. Hoo-ah! Hunters.
So
the
Amazon
Hunters. Prime Video series.
Al Pacino's Hunters. Now, when you brought this topic, to me, and a little bit of backstory about, I guess, my theatrical tastes. I keep saying theatrical. It's a film.
It's a TV show.
It's a TV show.
It's a TV show.
Yeah, what am I saying? It's a TV show. Now, a little bit of background. World War II, solid. I like it over the first one, let's just say. I didn't care so much about the first one. When I say this, I don't want it to be taken out of context, but anything regarding sort of the cataclysmism, if that even is a word, the cataclysmic event. I don't know. I made it up. Yeah. Regarding Nazis is such an interesting topic, and I can go on and on about the amount of times Schindler's List, Diary of Anne Frank, Boy in the Striped Pajamas, just stellar. Mm-hmm. However, when you brought this to my attention, I didn't even think this sentence could even be construed as a sentence. But when you say fetishization of Nazis,
what
does this mean?
It's fetishizing the Holocaust.
The Holocaust. I'm sorry.
So a little bit of context on the show.
You can really go from point A to point B with that one. It's kind of one and the same.
Basically, the show it's set in the 1970s. It's set in New York City. Cinematography is great. Costume designs.
That's about the only thing. I remember asking you this before. That's about the only thing that you can just extract that's the halfway decent.
It's grimy. There's a lot of graffiti. Then again, I've seen a lot of this already. Joker just came out last year.
Granted, you are spoiled when it comes to that.
Yeah. So it's kind of like you're showing me stuff that I've kind of just seen.
Mm-hmm.
And ironically, that had Robert De Niro. So, but it's kind of like you watch the show, and it's basically about, and I'm just going to say this outright, I forgot the names of everybody.
I mean, I probably won't watch it because the way you've been describing it.
I've only watched episode 1. I've toyed with watching episode 2, but the show left such a bad taste in my mouth.
Can you take the show from like a non-historical frame of reference and just appreciate it as just a show?
No.
You know, for it to be enjoyable? Because I know a lot of people dissociate those topics, right?
Well, the problem
you can say objectively, it's a good TV show without digging deeper into it. I mean, granted, you do have to turn your brain off to do it. You know, a lot of people do that when they watch movies.
And for this, you can't turn your brain off. You can't
turn your brain off. Okay.
The thing is, and this adds to the trivial, and trivializing isn't even the right word, but fetishizing is definitely the right, because the dialogue too. You know, I understand whether it's a TV show or movie that addresses racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, homophobia.
Yeah.
I understand that. In real life, and I'm speaking as somebody who, you know, and believe it or not, as a white male, you know, I've had in my own way some form of discrimination towards me, whether it's been anti-Semitic or homophobic.
Mm-hmm.
Like I have personally heard that hurled at me.
Mm-hmm.
So when I hear it in the show and they're saying these things to people that, you know, are supposed to be Jewish,
right?
It's kind of like you hear everything and you're thinking to yourself, well, okay, we get it. It's an Amazon show. Like you can show a little more. You can hear a little more.
You have to dramatize the racism,
but it's
to a point.
It's in your face.
Yeah.
And I understand the point of, you know, we want to. It's you know, showing you how horrible and raw anti-Semitism is, but it's also kind of like
it's. You know what it reminds me of, and I don't even have to see the show to say this. It's almost like Tarantino's Django, where it's not so much
and there's been comparisons to Tarantino, by the way.
But it's not so much.
There have been.
It almost reminds me how they sort of fetishized. Is that how you say it? Mm-hmm. Fetishized sort of the aspects of slavery in a way, where they took into consideration the types of colors Django would wear when he was a free man, the types of guns he would use when he was gunning down the white people, you know. Right. And it was sort of in your face, you know, not to mention the N-word being brought up every 5 seconds.
Well, you got to remember, too,
to really paint the picture.
Yeah.
But even myself on my second or third time watching it, because I do legitimately love Tarantino's films, not so much his last one. We'll get into that another time. However, I understand.
I'm very hit and miss with them.
I understand the need to paint a picture for sake of history. If it's a historical film, TV show, whatever.
Right.
But
this is purely fiction, by the way.
No, right.
Yeah.
But the sort of over glorification of, let's say, violent behaviors, obscene language. You know, when it's in your face and it no longer really becomes it's not really a dramatic approach anymore. It's just I'm saying this because it'll make good script writing. No, it won't.
Well, because
at least in my opinion,
I'll get to the nitty gritty of like what made it. You know, because again, you had the dialogue that it's kind of like, you know, look, we can say this word and we can say that, and it's like, okay, fine, we get it. Like there's anti-Semites, whatever. And it's frustrating because you don't want to hear it. You know,
you don't want to hear it. You know it's bad. You know we've moved on as a society from that.
No, we haven't.
Okay,
it's 2020,
right?
Like, we're, you know,
ideally.
Well, no, and here's the thing. Like I've watched so many movies and plenty of TV shows, and you know, I've seen films that have portrayed discrimination and, you know, using, you know, terminology that's just should outright be out of the language. When it comes down to this show in particular, it's kind of like from the get-go, it's just sort of in your face. And it reaches the point where one of the characters, it's Al Pacino, he's recounting a story at Auschwitz. because his character is somebody who he was from Europe. He came to the United States. He experienced World War II firsthand, and he knew the lead character played by Logan Lerman, or as I keep calling him, Percy Jackson. He knew his grandmother, and both of them were at the camp together. And he brings up a story about one German general or basically one Nazi leader at the camp who knew that there was someone at the camp who was like a chess master, like an excellent chess player. And so he decided to play chess with this other character, except the chess pieces were people who were interned at the camp. And you have the black and white pieces in chess. Mm-hmm. The white pieces, it was basically they stripped the people of their clothes, and the black pieces were just people wearing their standard attire in the camp. Mm-hmm. And they're slashing each other with razors and with knives, and that's how, when you play chess and you knock other pieces over, they're taking each other out by basically just slitting the other person's throat, and you're forced to do it. Otherwise, you get shot, or everyone there is killed. Mm-hmm. And that was something that the Auschwitz Memorial came out and basically said, and I have the statement in front of me, I should probably just directly say it. Auschwitz was full of horrible pain and suffering documented in the accounts of survivors. Inventing a fake game of human chess for hunters is not only dangerous, foolishness, and caricature, it also welcomes future deniers. We honor the victims by preserving factual accuracy. Mm-hmm. And I think, and granted, one of the creators of the show who had relatives who were at Auschwitz pointed out that the serial numbers that would be tattooed, there's how would I best describe it? The number of people who were there at Auschwitz, there's a particular number, I believe it was 202,499. Mm-hmm. Yes, 202,499. That was the highest recorded number given to a prisoner at Auschwitz. This is the statement that was issued in response by David Whale, who was the creator and executive producer of Hunters. And he brought that up to say that if you see another character in the show who's from Auschwitz who has the number tattooed on them, it is above that number. And that's because if he picked any number below 202,499, you're taking a number away from someone who really existed, and you're misrepresenting the truth.
Right.
Now, fine, but then why have the chess game in order to stress the fact that the Nazis were sadistic monsters? And that's something that is...
It makes good television. And I think...
And
as much as that just, it's a salt in the wound, exaggerative truth, mm-hmm. It makes good television.
And I think that's just the thing that...
Which is unfortunate. Because you could create a plot. Mm-hmm. They've done it before.
Yeah.
Where they don't need to over-dramatize elements like that.
Right.
You've seen the last 30 seconds of Boy in the Striped Pajamas.
Yeah. Well, and I've been... here's the thing, though.
It's a matter of...
Yeah.
Does this need to be shown for it to really drive the point home? In the case of the chess match, no. In the case of anything else you can find at Auschwitz, Birkenau, anything, mm-hmm. You have such a plethora of different aspects that you can tackle, some of which are I'd say are pretty... How do I say this without sounding sadistic? Because there are certain key aspects of the camps that could have been shown the light of day and have audience members say, wow, I never knew that existed.
But the thing is, the show is already so violent as it is, with the characters finding Nazis, because the show's basically, long story short, the show's about a group of people that are hunting down Nazis in hiding mm-hmm. in the United States. And they're it's Inglourious
Bastards, the prequel?
Oh, more like the sequel.
We're killing Nazis. Brad Pitt. Not to trivialize it, but what I'm saying is like.
But it's also because
hasn't this already been done before?
They're trying to stop Nazis that are in hiding who are trying to start a Fourth Reich, as they say at the end of the episode.
Okay.
And, my other big issue with the show being that it's all fiction in terms of Al Pacino's character and everyone else interacting with each other and their actions against, there is documentation of Nazis escaping to the United States. There is documentation of them going into hiding. But at the same time, there's documentation predating even World War II of Jewish communities basically gathering together and even after World War II, gathering together in order to stop growing anti-Semitism within their communities. One of which is wonderfully documented by Stephen J. Ross, who's a film historian. He compiled that in a book called Hitler in Los Angeles, which came out I think 3 or 4 years ago. And it's basically about a spy ring that infiltrated white supremacist groups, neo-Nazi groups, other fascist groups in LA, where we are, and Hollywood, and basically destroying them from the inside out, as well as interacting with the film studios and telling them, they're going to come after you. They want to come after you. They want to come after us. And that's something that's a story that it doesn't need to be gratuitous. It absolutely doesn't need to be violent. Yeah, there'd be some violence, but it's based in truth, and it's a story that deserves to be told. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the issue at hand here, is that we do live in a time with rising anti-Semitism. I know I've been to a Holocaust museum in LA where there is added security. And that is simply, they have a locking mechanism on their front door so that there's a security guard outside and a security guard by the entrance who just taps a switch and you're allowed into the museum. So, again, I understand putting pressure and also making it abundantly clear. Never again. I'm on the side of that. I just think a show like this doesn't do that. It doesn't do that movement any justice. However, I know there's another piece of content out there that's coming out soon that it addresses it in a much more obvious way in terms of the society that we live in, rather than taking real history and turning it into torture porn. And that is The Plot Against America, which is an upcoming HBO show. And it's based off of a novel by Philip Roth, where it's an alternate history of what would have happened if Charles Lindbergh won the 1940 election. And let's just say we're kind of living in that reality post-2016. I've read the book. It's a great book. It's haunting, given that the time we live in is frighteningly a bit similar. It's more than a bit. It's frighteningly similar in general. But it's also not taking... If anything, it's showing what could have happened had the United States gone down a path at that time that resembled what was happening in Europe. And from that element, it's, there's still going to be violence, there's still going to be some frightening stuff that you're going to see in that show. But at the same time, it's not going so far as to take something that was so real and so true, and that you have foundations and organizations working their elbows off right now to maintain that factual, to basically maintain the truth in a time period where, what is the truth? Mm-hmm. Where is the truth? Who is the truth with?
How do we get the truth?
How do we get the truth? Tell the truth.
And in what context is this truth going to be shown where
Yeah.
it can capture both audience attention and, retention, and have it be informative, which unfortunately I don't think can happen. I don't think can happen simultaneously.
I mean, I think within the that's the thing.
It's going to take a real kicker like Schindler's List or anything as eye-opening as any of the films previously described.
Well, it's
to really.
Sorry. Well, I was just going to say it's showing us something that it's within the context of what's happening today by other Americans. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where Plot Against America is something that is arguably more in sync with the world we're in and shining, putting a reflection on the society we live in, which of course is a weird part of our show. It's about putting a mirror to society. Whereas Hunters is more like, oh, they've infiltrated us and they're in hiding. Whereas in the United States, racists and xenophobes of any kind are that way from the very beginning of their lives, and they're still that way, and nothing has changed, and yet they've become giant figures within our society. So they didn't need to infiltrate or be covert or put on a fake accent. And, I'm shimmying like I'm a spy, like they didn't have to like crawl through walls and like do weird stuff. They literally just showed up and said, well, hey there, my name's Bob. When in reality, they were like, oh, it's these Americans. And that's the thing. And they do, that happens in Hunters. And it bothered me because I'm just like, of course that's going to happen.
When does the overacting stop and the history start?
So anyway, it's Hunters, not a recommend.
Highly recommend? Oh, no recommend?
Absolutely. Oh, dear God. Plot Against America, something to look out for. Yeah, and then I guess to kind of, since we're getting close to the end of the show, something that, we kind of wanted to do kind of a roundup, wrap-up sort of thing on this being episode 2. We finally got our podcast artwork for episode 1, and it's going to be there.
God, it looks so bland without it.
Oh, well, it's, I mean, it's either...
I thought that picture did us justice, but...
It did, but there's got to be more than that.
Yeah, there's definitely got to be more than that. So.
Shout out to Zachary Erberich. He's somebody that I've known for a long time. Another, I have to say it, another matador like us. But seriously, in all seriousness, a great guy. He's someone, watch out for him to come on the show. Actually, I had a good conversation with somebody else who wants to come on the show about Hunters. And in a weird way, I kind of changed her perspective on it because she thought it was very cool and very like...
Well, I'm sure it's cool from the get-go, and then you be like us, overanalyze everything, and, it's not cool.
But on top of that, I talked with Zach, and, we're definitely getting that outreach started in terms of artists. Where, we talked a little bit about this on Touchdowns and Tangents, which shout out to Kenny and Pete. They let Sebastian and I enter the ring, and what a bloodbath it was.
God. You want to talk about the first 15 minutes of absolutely nothing being said? And I'm not talking about content. No, we're talking about the Wi-Fi flickering on and off like a switch.
Oh, it was beyond the first 15 minutes.
It's the I don't even want to think about that.
But
all in all, great show. Shout out to them.
Yeah, I mean they're a brother network. They're our sibling. Without them, we probably wouldn't be here. And, we just want to give a shout out to them. Shout out to the Good News radio station for always being there, not just for the two of us, but also being there for Kenny and Pete and for Touchdowns and Tangents. It's an amazing platform over there.
Definitely to kick off the first episode, shout out Kevin MacLeod. I know it seems kind of like a moot point. His music's everywhere across the globe. You've heard it, no doubt, in 2007 YouTube gaming videos. Man, what a time that was. But we decided to kind of go a little bit royalty-free with this, at least for the time being. I don't know how much a shout-out is going to do, considering millions upon millions of people
recognition. It's...
the theme for it was titled, refresh my memory...
Well, I was going to give the credit at the end of the show because that's typically what's done in podcasting.
Well, I kind of jumped the gun a little bit, but
that's okay.
I thought you said this was the end of the show.
Well, we're getting there. I mean, we're close to it. We're 4 minutes. We're 4 minutes over, but that's okay. Is what it is. No one's knocking down the door.
Surprise.
We have it secure. So we're. If we run into a blast door situation like from Star Wars: A New Hope, then. We're all screwed. But yeah, no, we're, if anything, kind of addressing that in setting this platform up, our end goal is to create a collective where a lot of different artists from whatever medium it is. There's so many different mediums out there that it could be. It could be screenwriting. It could be comedy. It could be literal sculpt work. I mean, I think that's the beauty of a show like ours, is trying to build that kind of a platform for people that have the kind of talent and artwork that absolutely deserves to be recognized without it feeling like this corporate shove down your throat. And I think ultimately that's something that, thus far on social media we have been doing. We are trying to do since the beginning. I think we went into this with the attitude of, let's not be a conglomerate. Let's be someone approachable. And I think with previous collaborations, I mean, especially, I can't stress this enough, Touchdowns and Tangents really put our foot in the door in regards to, how that friendliness sort of, the relationship of friendliness between hosts and audience members. Mm-hmm. I sincerely do hope that we have that energy. Yeah. I think too, it's, we're starting out, the right. Tenacity will grow, and I think that's just the beauty of getting to be on other shows where there's a rhythm, and you kind of have to find your niche in that rhythm. Mm-hmm. Especially if you wind up being put on the spot. That's something that's always going to be real entertaining. But another thing as well is, since this episode is pre-recorded, I figure I'd give a quick kind of time travel, hopeful wish, which is I'm hoping everybody voted in what is technically yesterday, since this will be coming out March 4th. And the California primary Super Tuesday will technically be yesterday. Right. And see, now I'm trying to just get used to what YouTube videos do, where it's like, it's a holiday, but it's really Friday. Yeah. Just hoping that everybody went out and voted. I could be hearing this all next week and feel very disappointed, but I don't think that'll be the case. I think we'll be all out in full force. So, I guess... just to wrap things up, where can they find us? When it comes to social media platforms, you can find us at Mars on Life Show. That's at MarsonLifeshow. You all know how to spell. That can be found on Twitter, Instagram. Anything else? Since now we're up as a podcast format, right? You can find us on SoundCloud and on Anchor. SoundCloud, Anchor, and I know Anchor is more so a podcast aggregate distributing to, I believe it's 7 platforms at once. Yeah. So I think it's very, it's obviously very convenient. So. Yeah. And on top of that, we'll be hopping on to other podcast platforms in the coming weeks. So we'll be making our acknowledgments clear in regards to where you can find them on social media. And then on top of us, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can, individually, of course. Mars on Life, we're not on Facebook. That's for ethical reasons, even though we're on Instagram. You can find me at ManciniRA on Twitter, and you can also find me on Instagram at ManciniRyan. Respectively, for you, Dr. Sebi? Just stole the words right out of my mouth. At Dr. Sebi, and at Dr. Sebi with a underscore of Dr. and Sebi for Twitter, and just at Dr. Sebi for Instagram. So pretty simple. Mm-hmm. Keep it sane. So that's about it, and I guess we'll see you guys next time. Yeah. Are you gonna watch? Are you gonna watch Hunters? Or you better believe it. All right. Take it easy, everyone, and hope you all voted. Have a good one. Take care.